Archaeology gives us history you can hold in your hand. When an archaeologist digs up a jug like this in Israel, its style gives the archaeologist a date for the strata they're uncovering. And if it's inscribed with a name, there's a possible connection to someone we know from the Bible. That's what happened in 2021, one of the top discoveries of the year in biblical archaeology. I'm Gordon Govier, and this jug is just a replica. But I've done some archaeology, and when you come across something like this, an ancient jug or a lamp or a bowl, thousands of years old, you can't help but wonder, who was the last person to touch this? What was their life like? What did they look like? Where did they travel? For the past 40 years, I've been reporting on the latest discoveries and developments in biblical archaeology in my radio program, The Book The Spade. At the end of each year, Christianity Today magazine publishes my list of the top 10 biblical archaeology stories of the year. This list is a reminder that on a regular basis we're learning more and more about the biblical world, and that helps us understand the Bible better. So here's our list for 2021. It starts with a salvage excavation. Magdala's second synagogue. The University of Haifa announced the discovery of another first-century synagogue at Magdala on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The first Magdala synagogue, discovered a dozen years ago, was notable because it was in use before the destruction of Jerusalem, when worship was still centered at the Jerusalem temple. Of the handful of first-century synagogues that have been excavated in Israel, this one at Magdala had the strongest case for being a synagogue visited by Jesus during his ministry, both by its location near the Nazareth to Capernaum road and its association as the hometown of Mary Magdalene. And now, a second synagogue, uncovered less than 200 yards away from the first one, while preparing for a road widening project. It's changing our understanding of Jewish life in this period, according to a release from the Israel Antiquities Authority. Many scholars had assumed, contrary to the New Testament, that synagogues flourished and took on a more religious function only after the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So now we're understanding that a little bit better. Number 2 on the list, the Yerubaal inscription. The Yerubaal is the nickname given to Gideon in Judges 6:31 and 32 after Gideon destroyed an altar to the pagan god Baal, or Baal. And it means, let Baal contend with him. It's also the name found written on a pottery jug fragment excavated at Khirbet Erai, a site near Tel Lachish in southern Israel. The possibility that that small jug could have belonged to Gideon himself seems unlikely. Khirbet Erai is located about 100 miles south of the Jezreel Valley, where the Bible says Gideon took a tiny army and routed a much larger force of Midianites. But the archaeologists excavating at Khirbet Erai dated the stratum where the ostracon, that's pottery with writing on it, was found, to the time of the Judges. The Bible's internal chronology might suggest Gideon lived a century or so earlier. Very little is known about this period from an archaeological point of view, though. So at the very least, this discovery links a biblical name to the era in which it appears in the Bible, the era of the Judges. The archaeologists say the discovery provides evidence for the spread of alphabetic writing, which was first developed by Canaanites living in Egypt around 1800 BC. They suggested that nearby Lachish, where a few other late Bronze Age Canaanite alphabetic inscriptions have been found, may have been a center for the preservation of alphabetic writing. Earlier this year, the discovery of an alphabetic inscription at Lachish dated to the 15th century BC was announced. So the level of literacy in the Old Testament is still a matter of debate among scholars, but interestingly, in that story of Gideon in Judges chapter 8, there's a reference to a young man who wrote down the names of the 77 elders of Sukkot. Now to number 3 on our list, a Temple Mount Banquet Hall. A luxurious public building located next to the Temple Mount has been excavated and opened to public tours. Part of this building was first discovered by British archaeologist Charles Warren way back in 1867. It was partially excavated in 1966. Now the excavation is complete, and archaeologists have dated it to about AD 20. The building contained 2 identical chambers separated by an elaborate fountain. The luxurious nature of this facility and its adjacency to the Temple Mount indicates it was probably used by elite members of the first century Jewish community, like the family of the high priests and other leading religious figures. Archaeologists say it was damaged by an earthquake in 33 AD, then later rebuilt. That destruction date suggests possible evidence of the earthquake recorded in the gospel accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus. Number 4 on our top 10 list, Yavneh. A fast-growing city located between Tel Aviv and Ashdod has been a prolific site for archaeological discoveries in 2021 as a large tract of land is prepared for some new housing construction. 1,500 years ago, Yavneh was an industrial center for wine production, producing approximately 500,000 gallons of wine per year. The archaeologists have discovered 5 wine press production areas, each over half the size of a basketball court, along with huge warehouses and kilns for firing wine jars. Gaza and Ashkelon wine, named after the nearby ports from which it was shipped, was known throughout the Mediterranean area. They also found older wine presses from the Persian period, about 300 BC. In the decades after the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, Yavneh became a spiritual center for the Jews, the home of many rabbis and the Sanhedrin. That building identified with that period has been found in the ruins also and excavated. There was also a large mosaic that was found at Yavneh, and, perhaps the rarest discovery, an intact chicken egg from about 1,000 years ago. Number 5 on that list, a Neolithic basket, as well as some Dead Sea Scroll texts. The Israel Antiquities Authority announced late last winter results of a 4-year excavation project in some hard-to-reach caves overlooking the Dead Sea. Their finds included some scraps of biblical texts, and these were unrelated to the Qumran community texts, but nonetheless they're dubbed Dead Sea Scrolls. They also found mummified remains of a young girl, and most amazing of all, a 10,500-year-old intact basket with a lid. This basket dates to the pre-pottery Neolithic period. It's the oldest basket in the world and is reminiscent of some of the basket stories in the Bible. The baby Moses in a basket, Paul's escape from Damascus over the wall in a basket. Number 6 on our top 10 list, the recently announced discovery of the remains of a crucified man. The Roman practice of crucifixion is well known from ancient sources, including the gospel accounts of Jesus' death. But up until this month, the only archaeological evidence of crucifixion was found in a burial cave in Israel back in 1986. In early December, it was announced a skeleton had been excavated from a grave in a Roman period cemetery at Fen Stanton in Cambridgeshire, England, with a nail driven into the back of his right foot. The burial dates to about 400 AD. Number 7 on the list, the Egyptian city of Amenhotep III. This is a discovery of a previously unknown city on the west bank of the Nile River near Luxor. It was announced in April. It's believed to be one of the largest Egyptian cities ever unearthed and dates to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Now, Amenhotep III was the grandfather of Tutankhamun, but more importantly, perhaps, the grandson of Amenhotep II, who is believed by many evangelical scholars to be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Thus, as Pompeii illustrates what life was like in the Roman Empire around the time of Jesus, what excavators have found in this city shows what it was like around the time of Moses in Egypt. Much like Pompeii, destroyed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, the city appears to have been suddenly abandoned, with many articles of everyday life left. Number 8 on the list also comes from Egypt, the Hofra Stela, which was discovered in a farmer's field in northeastern Egypt. This is an inscribed monument that bears the name of one of the few pharaohs actually named in the Old Testament. Hofra led an Egyptian army into Judah to help King Zedekiah resist an invasion by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. This ploy was temporarily successful. Then, true to the prophecy of Jeremiah 44:30, Hofra was later killed by his enemies after a disastrous foray into Libya. The stele contains 15 lines of hieroglyphics, and they're not translated so far. The Secretary General of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities described it as a border stela which the king erected during his military campaigns toward the east, which raises the intriguing possibility that it might possibly describe Hofra's campaign to support Zedekiah. Number 9 on our top 10 list, Herod's Basilica. The Israel Antiquities Authority has announced the rediscovery and preservation of a basilica built by Herod the Great in Ashkelon. A basilica was a Roman period building where community activities took place. And this huge building, which was larger than a football field, was first excavated over a century ago, but only now is the site being re-excavated and developed to attract visitors to the Tel Ashkelon National Park. There are huge marble statues of pagan deities, marble pillars and capitals, and an Odeon, a small theater, that are all part of this project. And another story about Herod, number 10 on our list, Herod the Great Gardener. Soil samples taken from excavations at Herod's Jericho Palace almost a half century ago were recently analyzed, and the pollen particles revealed sophisticated horticulture. Miniature versions of pine, cypress, cedar, olive, and other trees had been planted in clay pots that were recovered by archaeologist Ehud Netzer many years ago. Those trees would not have typically been growing in the desert conditions surrounding Jericho, so Herod was doing this to impress his visitors and his subjects, as was typical of Herod. We also have a bonus item on our list this year about bananas. The intensive water retention practices needed to raise bananas in Israel today would have been unlikely in the world of King Solomon 3 millennia ago, but the taste of a banana, maybe not. In a study printed in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the researchers reported dietary microremains and plant proteins scraped from teeth found in the graves of Canaanites and Philistines of the late 2nd millennia BC yielded surprising evidence about diets and international trade. Typical diet staples like bread and dates were in evidence, but they did not expect to find these Middle Eastern residents of 3,000 years ago eating soybeans, turmeric, and bananas. But teeth don't lie, at least at the level of dental calculus. This dietary evidence indicates a dynamic and complex exchange network connecting the Mediterranean with South Asia during the 2nd millennium BC, according to the report. Christine Warrener, a Harvard anthropologist, was one of the lead investigators. She says bananas do not grow well in the Levant, so we think they were imported. We propose the bananas may have been imported in a dried form, as they're still often shipped today over long distances. So starting with the second synagogue in Magdala and ending with biblical bananas, that's our list of the top biblical archaeology stories of 2021. We have links to our Christianity Today version of this story on our website at radioscribe.com. We also have links to information about our quarterly biblical archaeology news magazine, Artifacts, at radioscribe.com. I'm Gordon Govier. Join us again next time for more backgrounders on the Bible through biblical archaeology on the Book and the Spade.
The Book and the Spade is produced by Scribe Media. For information on biblical archaeology resources or obtaining a copy of this program on CD, go to our website at radioscribe.com.